Hello, all, and welcome to the Realpolitechpodcast. I'm Sandy Plunkett.
I'm Joanne Gray, and today, in our first interview, we're going to be speaking with the Chief Executive of the National Reconstruction Fund, David Gall. Really looking forward to that conversation. But Sandy, maybe first we should tell everyone a little bit about the Realpolitech podcast.
Yeah, sure. So we decided to do the Realpolitech podcast because Australia and the world is in total flux and change, a world of accelerated technological change and geopolitical change. And so we thought that we would like to talk to a number of diverse leaders and entrepreneurs and builders in Australia and around the world to try and make sense of the change that's happening, but also especially Australia's place and potential in it.
Great. And I think, what we're really trying to find out is, do our leaders and decision makers and those who are starting new businesses and running businesses have the deep and pragmatic, I guess, understanding of, all of the technological elements, that software and the data and the AI systems that are really driving the global economy this century.
You hit it on the head with the two words, which is deep capability, deep knowledge, but also pragmatic, right? And that's why we term Realpolitech, because it's a technocentric play on the common term Realpolitech, which means pragmatism and capability versus ideology,
Yeah.
right?
So I think what we want to do is contribute to and try to build a new conversation that's pretty accessible to all Australians about this new era of technologically driven change. And, how does Australia really solidify or grow or, position itself in this world? And how do we, what do we need to do to get there? Because we're really not there yet.
No, we're really, for a smart, wealthy country, we're really coming from behind. We have been quite literally sleepwalking through a lot of the massive, high-value, technologically enabled new industry development, because we've had plentiful resources to keep us going. But those days seem to be over, which is why the National Reconstruction Fund was established. It was first announced by this current Labor government in its first term, very early in its first term, but it wasn't incorporated till much later, like October 2023, and it made its first investment the following month in November. It has since made a total of 10 investments, and they're in these key priority areas, ranging from transport to critical minerals to energy, but also something called enabling technologies. And I would argue, Joe, and you will hear me say this a lot in successive podcasts, is that enabling technologies, what Australia considers enabling technologies, at least from government policy point of view, is in fact the main game. And so I would argue that one of the problems with government policy and reindustrialization capability is that we need to flip it. We need to flip it to focus on how do you take advantage of the enabling technologies like AI, like robotics, a whole heap of other skills to actually build these new high-value businesses and industries, whether they've got government support or they're private sector driven only.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And how do we actually, if we don't have those capabilities, how do we quickly build them and how do we skill up? But I think one of the interesting things when we turn to our conversation with David Gall is going to be also, having a look at this organization, which has really got a lot on its plate and major expectations attached to its performance. This sort of almost 1950s concept of rebuilding manufacturing capability in Australia. But what does that actually mean in this era, the digital era, the AI era? And the other really interesting thing is the very big overlay of national security
Mm.
and building and defense, economic security, national security, very tightly tied together, and this whole idea about diversifying our supply chains in key areas.
And David Gall joined as the new CEO in January, so it's been half a year or so. But he came after. It's fair to say that the NRF had a patchy start. Very sort of slow to get going, and the first CEO, Ivan Power, had to resign due to ill health. So David Gall is the second CEO, and he's got a big job of building capability within the National Reconstruction Fund, and also really cementing the NRF as a key part of the innovation and industrial ecosystem in Australia.
Yeah, and that's not a small task.
Mm-mm.
Establishing, setting up, and creating a presence and a profile for a completely new institution. In a nation that's got quite a few different agencies jostling for profile and for influence. I think
Yes,
it's a politically charged
charged.
moment, and it's a politically charged organization, and it
Right.
has a role to play with this government's imprimatur, obviously. So super difficult time to build something from scratch, not just any institution, but this one has got a lot of complexity associated with it. So really interesting sort of time for David Gall to be speaking to us.
So the NRF, like $15 billion, that sounds like a lot of money, and perhaps it is a lot of money for Australia for one government funded vehicle. But it's really tiny compared to what you're seeing in other countries, including the UK now.
Yeah, so there's a hugely important innovation element to this, obviously, as well, and investing in innovation, which is also not something that we have done necessarily all that well, especially when it's being driven by government. In fact, those two things often don't go together at all. So
Yes, I mean,
super super intrigued to see how this is going to play out, and how what the strategy is in terms of really sort of getting impact from that small amount, which obviously they want to help to unlock private capital investment as well. But this is essentially a very big venture capital and private equity play on the part of a government in a field that we haven't got natural capability. And so there's a lot riding on this.
there is a lot riding on it. His career has been in banking, which is not venture investing. It's very different, and he certainly hasn't come out of the technology scene. So, look, there's a lot. So, how about we just go to that conversation
Great.
right now? Hello, David Gall, and thank you for being here on the Realpolitech podcast.
Hi, David.
Well, look, thanks very much, Sandy. It is great to be here with you and Joe today, and I feel incredibly honoured to be here on your first podcast.
You've got a very big job at a very, very complex time. So let's ease into it with the easy questions first, which is, why did you accept the job?
What a wonderful question. Sandy, 6 months in, I'm not asking myself why I accepted the job. I've got to say, what really appealed here from my perspective, and, having had sort of 3.5 decades in banking, and a lot of that in and around banking businesses in Australia, both large and small, the opportunity to actually be more of an investor was one that really took me. But frankly, to actually be able to make a contribution to building industrial capability, to build manufacturing capability in this country, was one that was really, really appealed to me. And I think that was part of it. But what I really loved is the fact that the organisation is not trying to do everything for everyone. It's very much focused and the Act calls out 7 priority areas, but it's focused in areas where I think Australia has or has the potential to have comparative advantage, i.e., we can compete not just well here in Australia, but on the global stage as well. And so for me, to have this opportunity to do something different, to be able to add value back into a country and a business community that I've been able to personally receive so much out of, was really, really exciting. And I think the final thing for me is when I met the team, the people are really great people.
So people don't really understand how these processes work. So was it a very long recruitment process? Did you put your hand up? Did you receive a call from somebody? What actually happened there?
So it's really, it is really interesting. I'm giving away all the secrets here. The really interesting thing here is you think, oh, they, put headhunters out and they specifically track you down and all that sort of stuff. This was an ad in the paper. And these sort of jobs, you've got to actually advertise. I wasn't looking. I've just opened up the AFR and it's staring at me. And I'm thinking, my goodness, I can actually make a contribution here. I can make a difference here. And this is stuff that's building on the areas of expertise that I've been working on and building up for decades. And I'm really excited about it.
Newspapers are manufactured products, right? And I'm 2024 or 2023 that you are relying on an actual physical newspaper ad. That's really great news. So, and David, like what, from your experience as, 35 years in banking, and you have banked a lot of smaller companies, what do you see as the gap between those companies that you were banking and, the creation of actually, competitive industries? Like what part is missing in the whole chain? Because you're banking them, so they got the finance, but what was missing there?
So I think there's a few things. The first thing is, look, I think Australia has a very successful SME sector and businesses, and there's no doubt about not just the entrepreneurialism, but the drive and how Australian business people start and grow business, and they do it in the most extraordinary ways, and that's really to be commended. But I think a few things. I think firstly, to scale these businesses often requires capital, and it matters how quickly you scale these businesses. So if you've got a business that is, and has the potential to be a global leader, you don't just need the resources over time to get there and build it through a series, of reinvesting profits and, et cetera, over time. You actually need support, including the right capital, financial support, to be able to scale those businesses quickly so that, competitors in other parts of the world don't get there first. And often in some of these, particularly these technology enabled areas, the rents, if you like, the real profits go to the largest few. And so scaling really matters, and scaling fast really matters. And that's where I think, and certainly if I look at some of the investments the NRFC's already made, but certainly when I look at our pipeline as well, the need to get there and get there fast is an important one. And I think sometimes too, Joe, it's where we're seeing businesses go offshore because they can get both the access to capital and also this view that they can scale faster.
Australia has quite a challenge ahead of itself, don't we? Because not only have we let our traditional or legacy manufacturing and industrial capability diminish over the last several decades, but we've also been really quite complacent around the adoption and development of the digital technologies. And of course, now AI has hit, and it's a disruptive and transforming enabling technology or a platform technology. And it is, in fact, the enabling technology for any competitive and advanced manufacturing project going on, whether that be for the green energy transition or medtech and agtech or robotics, aerospace and defense. So what I'm wondering is, how are you at the NRF making sure that you're adequately beefing up those digital skills, that digital savvy, in order to adequately assess the proposals that really should be coming your way?
Yeah, look, you're exactly right, Sandy. But it's interesting because, why haven't we reacted sooner, faster? And what is it about the fact that what you've just really described, in some respects, is opportunity cost? Like, Australia's done okay, but it's left a lot of value on the table. How do we, as a nation, have that right sense of urgency to really go after this? And I think it is trying to really bring it to life. Like, I suppose what I'm seeing now that I wasn't seeing in 35 years of banking is just in a really concentrated way, some of these technology enabled high growth businesses. Now, these businesses, they might be AI and they're technology enabled, but they're solving real life issues and problems. Like, one of the, I think, best examples that we've already invested in, that I sort of bring this to life with, is Harrison AI. Harrison AI, like the name it says, it's an AI business, but in actual fact, it's a medical science business. And it's a business that, at the end of the day, is helping radiographers understand and diagnose cancer quicker and save lives. Absolutely fantastic. But here is a great example of something that Australia is really well known for, and that's medical science research. We've got decades of awesome capability coming out of the university sector. Talk about comparative advantage, and should Australia be able to really play on the global scale? Yes. And then you combine that with, enabling capabilities like the technology out of AI. And I think this is what Australia can be really world class at. Like, we're not going to have the
So
next.
you're saying that Australia can be really world class at AI enabled medtech?
At AI enabled a number of different areas where it plays to, a strength. So it's the way you use the AI or the robotics, or, even in the future world, quantum, to then solve these real life issues, these real life challenges, these real life business opportunities.
So you've been in the chair for like 5-6 months, right?
Yep.
Came in January 2025. It's fair to say that NRF had sort of a patchy start for all sorts of reasons. When you came in and like, from what I understand, you like put your hand up and like, I want this. I want this job, and I see the value in it, and that's fair enough. And then shortly after, like, so in May or June, we had the Australian National Audit Office report. It wasn't a glowing report. It was very diplomatically worded, but it basically sort of, that Australian National Audit Office report was really about the design and establishment of the National Reconstruction Fund. And the Australian National Audit Office basically said, broadly directionally okay, but you've got a little bit of a incomplete investment strategy, you've got an incomplete finance strategy, and you've got some stakeholder engagement issues. And David, I know that you want to move forward because it wasn't your tenure, but like, how do you feel about that ANO report, and what do you do about it, right?
Yeah, great. Look, again, it's a good question. I think it's an important question, and I think a few things here. The ANAO, it has an incredibly important role, just as auditors do in organisations as well. But from my perspective, when I first came in, it was actually sitting down with the ANAO and really saying, hey, this is an opportunity for us to learn as an organisation. We're actually really young. We're only quite new. We've only just started investing, as announced our first investments. And I wanted us as an organisation to really use the process, the audit process, to build, a great organisation, and importantly, build an organisation on the right foundations, on the right solid foundations as well. And so, as the ANAO put together their series of recommendations, I think it was 7 recommendations in total. My immediate response was to embrace each of those and use it, but you actually use it as an opportunity to really, with all the other sort of bits of feedback that I could get for the organisation, to use it to actually build out a really robust platform and a really robust, not just investment process, but business, the organisation, the corporation that the NRFC is seeking to be. But I think one point, so for me, it's all very well for me coming a little bit later. I can sort of say, "Hey, bring it on, and let's."
It wasn't on my watch.
Let's learn from that. But in actual fact, I think the important thing here is, I won't say this is free consulting, but there's a lot of experience in the ANAO from other organisations and other organisations like us that they can do the read across and say, hey, peers have done this, they've built this way, they've, watch out for these things. And we can factor all of that into our plans. So from my perspective, was embrace it, bring it on. How do we learn from it? How do we become a better organisation? And that is absolutely my attitude there. I was pleased to see that their overall assessment, particularly in terms of governance and the sort of setup, is largely sound. I think that compared pretty much in line with other like predecessor specialist investment vehicles and stuff like that. But actually, Sandy, I've got to say the key for me here is I don't want to find a situation where we haven't acted on or responded to the 7 recommendations. Like that'd be the worst thing, to give it short shift. Actually, here they've laid out a plan for us. Actually, execute against that. So, from my perspective, that's an absolute priority.
Great. Yeah, and it is good to have to be able to say, well, I inherited this. We can learn from it. At about the same time that you got that ANAO report, you got a statement of expectations from your ministers, Katie Gallagher and Tim Ayres, essentially saying you need to speed up investment and favour national interest over short-term profit. So you're under pressure now to deploy about $1.5 billion this year, and you have to, take the national interest into account in commercial deals. So as a risk guy, how are you juggling this?
Yeah. So I certainly welcome the statement of expectations for the ministers. And that's not an uncommon thing for them to do. In fact, I think all of the other specialist investment vehicles have had that over their history. But I see it as being incredibly aligning for us. So there's a few things, and you've touched on a couple of those, Joe, already, but there's a few things that struck me as, we went through that. The first is it did acknowledge that we've gone and delivered on what we said we were going to do in the first year, which was said we're going to do 550 and we've got 584 million commitments out there. So good start. Now, it backs it up by saying, hey, and we note
We're
that
faster.
you've actually put it out there, but we're saying go for it, which is the 1.5 billion this year. And, that is triple. So that's a big uplift. But when I look at the pipeline, I can see how we can get there, how we can do that, and how we can do it and take, measured risk. We are in the risk-taking business here. There's no question about that. And not everything will succeed. But I think when I look at our overall objective as a fund, at least in the return sense, it has been set at a level that means that not everything needs to go perfectly, not everything needs to go right. And
it's not a 10x. It's not a 10x venture fund metric.
No, it's not. And the reality is, we'll have some things that, with the benefit of hindsight, we'll say, well, geez, why did we do that? Or, that didn't work.
So do venture funds with a 10x metric. Yes.
Yeah, yes, but they might have a 10x aspiration, but deliver something a little different to that to shareholders somewhere down the track. But in any event, my point is here, we're here for a lot more than the return on the fund. We're here, obviously, to help and support the diversification, the growth of industrial capability in Australia, this manufacturing capability in Australia, which, some would argue has sort of been atrophying away. And I'd probably say it's actually, new ways of manufacturing in Australia as well, because you've already talked about areas like AI, and most people would say, well, what's AI got to do with manufacturing? And I'd say an enormous amount.
See, that's the kind of sort of savvy which I think is actually severely lacking in Australia, because most of your applicants, they are lamenting the fact that they have to explain to the National Reconstruction Fund what AI has to do with advanced manufacturing. So who is leading who here? And are we able, if we don't see that digital underlies everything, AI is just an extension of digital. Does the NRF peeps, do you and the NRF investment managers, are they versed in the world of digital scale, digital network laws? This is really, really crucial in terms of what bets we make and what bets the government and the taxpayer makes.
So there's a lot in that, and I want to come back to that key point you were making: who's leading who here and who's driving? Because I think it's actually a really important point. And the way I'd answer is, I'd say actually we are going to be going on a series of learning. Yes, is there good capability and understanding in the team? Yes, there is. However, do I recognise we need to continue to add to that, to evolve that, which is going to have two elements to it. One is, what additional capabilities do we need to add to the team, so get from the marketplace? And what do those capabilities look like? Are they specifically technical related? Are they commercial related, etc.? And what competencies can we continue to build over time? And it's interesting, and it struck me, and to be fair, I reckon our CIO's been doing a wonderful job around this. There was
you're talking about Mary Manning? Dr. Mary Manning?
Yeah, Mary Manning. And one of the things that really struck me in coming into the organisation is because it's relatively small, there's about 66 of us today. We'll build to probably about 90, but there's about 66 of us.
So you're saying 66 staff in total, or investment managers? Or...
No, in total. But,
Wow, I thought you were bigger than that.
No, we're quite contained, but as others would say, gee, 66 is a lot of people. And it probably is for an investment business, but we do a lot more than investments. But the point I'm making is the way we operate is very much around bringing our people along the journey and helping in their education process. If you think you've made it, then you've got to be able to learn. The biggest capability here is actually the learning capability, the ability to listen to clients, the ability to listen to businesses, understand and process and work out, does this make sense in actually backing it? So it's actually the ability. We've got the smart people. It's the ability. It's to create the environment for them where they can properly understand the opportunities that are being put before them, and that we have processes that enable if you like, a really objective assessment of that as well. And do I agree with you in terms of underpinning everything will be technology? I largely agree with that. But actually, it's interesting too, and particularly in and around the economic resilience elements of what's come out in the statement of expectations. I think there'll also be some, perhaps some older style businesses that are going to need some support along the way here as well as they transition.
So, I mean, the statement of expectations is essentially giving you quite a good amount of political cover to align really closely with government strategy, because I think it even suggested that you help fund industrial facilities at risk of failure, like smelting, or clean energy manufacturing supply chains like wind towers. And I also noticed in the statement of expectations, which is part of the economic resilience thing, that you're now able to give out zero interest loans to businesses that are disrupted, perhaps by Trump tariffs or whatever. I mean, it's quite a significant scope, not scope creep, but expansion of, the expectations on what your political masters want you to be doing. So I'd love to hear your reaction to that kind of guidance.
Yeah. So already with the 7 priority areas, it is quite a broad scope.
Yeah.
But one of the things coming out of the election and lead up to the election was a government commitment around establishing a $1 billion fund around this economic resilience program. Now, it's within that $1 billion, which is $1 billion of the NRFC's $15 billion, right, that the government specifically sort of calls out, support for impacted industries, etc. And I think it gives the example of potentially smelting or etc. in there. So that's in the, if you like, in the $1 billion element, not in the remaining $14 billion element, and that is we're still obviously very, very focused at delivering new and increased capability and funding for capability in building out those seven priority areas.
So that's quite different then, isn't it? This is quite
I think it's a very focused piece of it. But what's still important here is often these areas and industries are going to be crucial for other things that we do as a nation. Like there'll be, commodities being processed, refined, produced here in industries that need some support for a period of time that are going to be integral to new industries, whether that's in, renewables and low emissions technologies and or, some of the other priority areas that we're focused at as well. Because you were sort of touching on this before, because part of, I think, what we're here for, what we're trying to do as well, is join the dots a bit in terms of what's some of these supply chains or value chains looks like? What are some of the ecosystems that are emerging here, and what role is it, particularly in terms of resilience of these supply chains, what role does Australia need to play in this? What can we afford to still perhaps source offshore or manufacture offshore? What should we be actually looking to bring back here?
Exactly, but they're all questions. They're not answers. So what
So,
do you
yeah,
think? What do you think about, what is the balance between support, subsidies, for how long, and at what point do you let people
yeah,
out in the wild defend for themselves, which is what industry and business should do?
I do have views around this. I think
Mm.
you've got to think about it in terms of where your long-term comparative advantage can actually be. And so, to me, what that means, and if you take something like resources, now we often criticise ourselves as a country for digging it up and shipping it off. So, what value add can you put to it here? Well, in many cases, I don't think it's going to be the whole value chain. It's not going to be all the processing. It could well be the processing that logistically and cost effectively makes sense to do near the source of origin. So, the comparative advantage then becomes proximity. But, the further processing of, say, a rare earth or a critical mineral, above and beyond that may make sense to really do where the commodity is ultimately used at the end of the day.
But aren't you kind of saying there are parts of the value chain that we think we can, that we've actually done a bit more work on understanding how far behind we are at various parts of the value chain, and we're focusing very closely. Are you doing that? Are you finding up those really specific parts of the value chain where we can create an advantage? Or, there's an example of the Australian government wanting to start solar panel manufacturing. And I know there's a very small amount of that in Australia, but wow, that's a really big expense when we can get them very cheaply from China. Is it just a matter of, just paying to do whatever it takes to loosen that stranglehold? I know sort of bunched a few things together there, but I'm
Yeah,
curious about that comparative advantage piece in,
yeah,
specific elements of it.
yeah. I wouldn't mind bringing the comparative advantage bit and hey, I think about the value chain to life in a deal. So the deal example I'd use is Arafura. Now you'd be aware
Yeah.
that the NRFC's committed $200 million of equity
Yep.
alongside various other parts of government that have committed, not just Australia, but offshore governments as well, committed about 1.1 billion US dollars in debt towards Arafura and the creation of one of the world's largest NdPr, so neodymium
Yeah.
and praseodymium mines in the world. Now, just to put in perspective, that is expected to have a mine life of about 35 years, and over those 35 years produce 4% of the world's NdPr. Now, those two ingredients, now it's, periodic table elements 59 and 60, those two ingredients go to making magnets, whether that's for EVs, for wind turbines, etc. And the point is here, out of what Arafura are going to build here, it will have more downstream processing than Australia's ever done before with these elements. So it'll turn it into an oxide. And so that's good, and it makes sense that Australia can compete there. My point is actually then turning into the magnet, we're probably not going to be the best to be able to do that. And so then letting it go, putting the value add in, and then understanding when another country is actually going to do the final bits of the value chain, that yes, that will add value, but we're not the natural owner of doing that part of the process, I think makes a lot of sense. So, but I'm seeing examples, and I'd call out the Arafura one, we'll see more like that, where we're being thoughtful about where we add value, not just trying to fill in the whole supply chain because we think it sounds good.
Can
And
you give us
I
some
like,
examples of that, David? What are you looking at?
So that was one example there. I think there are other examples that I think we'll also see in areas like defence as
Yeah,
well, and
yeah.
thinking about and defence will be interesting because it won't be
Like
just about
drones or quantum comms or what?
Yes, and yes. I think in the quantum sensing side, there'll definitely be capabilities that are being developed by Australian businesses that are very attractive to defence. I think we will see it and continue to see it in areas like drones, and I think we'll see it in areas like munitions and the like as well. And the point, in part, is this: it'll be certainty of supply and not just cost as well. So, there'll be good, sovereign reasons for wanting to see more of the value chain, supply chain, actually potentially produced here in Australia.
How do you create a culture of expertise that is assessing people that should be way more advanced than you in any of these things? How are you building that capability internally, and how are you making people feel comfortable about that?
Yeah. So a fair bit in what you've just asked there, Sandy. The first thing
Sorry.
I'd say is we do seek to understand and cross-check things in a whole bunch of ways. So, who are some of the leaders in the field? Who are some of the leaders in the industry? Obviously speaking to them, sort of garnering from them their their expertise, what to watch out for. But probably the key point I'd make, Sandy, is I do think we've got a role in helping to, through our investments, help shape how some of these, if you like, industries are actually coming together. And, we have, whether it's quantum or parts, and AI is such a big thing. But if I take quantum for a second, we would say there's also a series of businesses out there that are the picks and shovels of quantum as well. They're going to do well, notwithstanding which quantum technology wins out
Yeah,
at the end of the day,
I get
because they
that.
provide services to the quantum.
I
Now,
get that.
we're taking a view on each of those three parts of quantum. And, we'll have a portfolio there at the end of the day. But, the reality is we're going to probably play in all three of those elements. Now,
Okay.
I'm just using that as an example because I just wanted to build a little industry sort of sub-ecosystem together to give you a sense of the kind of way we're
Yep.
thinking about it internally.
Yep. Isn't the role of the NRF to help create a portfolio competition baseline?
Yes, but I think we've also got to be able to see where we'll have views in terms of what's going to succeed and what's not going to succeed as well. Your point around portfolio is just so important here. And I think is some of the difference between some of what we see here and offshore. For us at the NRF, it's seriously, it's one of the biggest challenges because you
Yeah,
don't start with a portfolio unless you went and bought, I don't know, a big fund or something like that. You
that's right.
start with individual investments. And
Yes,
of
you do.
course, your issues are going to show up long before your good ones are going to
Yep.
show up. And so you've
True.
got to be able to withstand, the pain of some early issues showing up. Now, having this portfolio approach, and what I want us to do is to be able to say, well, you know, we shouldn't stop looking at the next, I don't know, early stage quantum deal just because we've done a couple, because we've just got to even up the rest of the portfolio.
Yeah.
Think about it in reverse. What's the portfolio going to look like in 5 years' time, and when we've got $15 billion out the door? And are we happy to have, I'm making this up, but $500 million of that 15 billion in, I'm not making it up that much actually,
No, you're not.
of that 15 billion in quantum related in investments, and and looking at it from that perspective. So in terms of us and me and Mary running the portfolio, that's very top of mind for us. But we're going to, the reality is, I'm looking forward here. We're going to probably uh, make some good choices, I hope. We won't get everything right, and we've got to be able to withstand the criticism that'll come our way of, well, why did you have, three investments in quantum when, you should have had more in agricultural value added or something. And we want to get there, but you've got to start somewhere.
Kind of interesting though, to like, are you going to be led by what comes at you, or are you going to be led by your kind of what the government wants you to do,
Yeah.
or and what you think the bang for the industries and the parts of industries that you think we're going to get the biggest bang for the buck? Because $15 billion, even if it leverages a whole bunch of private capital, you just have to be so strategic, don't you, in what you pick
You do.
to have impact.
Yeah, yeah,
Don't you want to-
Joe, we're definitely pivoting there. So I think up until 3 or 4 months ago, we're far more driven by just what's coming in the front door, what's coming in terms of
Right.
people finding us and saying, hey, let's have a chat to the NRFC. If you look at where we are today, there is a lot more proactivity by our teams. What we've set up now is like priority sector heads in various priority sectors who are mapping out the landscape, who understand who the players are, and there's far more of us going to those businesses.
Yep.
Now, it won't be all one-way traffic. It won't be just us completely saying, right, the only ones we want to deal with are the ones that we're targeting. We want to be there and understand, and hear from the full range of businesses out there. And that's important because even if they're not ready for our investment yet, we can probably direct them to somewhere in government that can help them a bit as well, including areas like the industry grant program and the like. So we are helping a whole bunch of businesses that we don't actively invest in, or at least not yet. And of course, that's a great pipeline for the future. But having a blend of that and our priority area like experts actually going out and making sure that we're actually attracting some of the businesses that we see are going to be, successful.
What are those priority areas? If you've drilled down a bit more, can you take us under the covers,
under the hood,
a little bit, to find out where you're focusing, where you're narrowing it to?
Yeah. So let me give you a few examples. I think there's certainly be examples in the medical science area, and that is, again, leveraging some of what we're seeing coming out of the universities. But you will have seen we also recently now announced an investment in Brandon, as well, and part of that is, and it wasn't, I suppose, a coincidence that one of our most recently announced investments, Polyactiva, was a co-investment with Brandon as well. So of that $40 million round, we did 27 of it, Brandon did 13. And I would see us, notwithstanding we've invested in the Brandon's BB6, I would see us potentially doing more, perhaps co-investing with them and with others as well. So seeing those opportunities in that kind of sector. I touched on it before, but I do think, particularly given the pressure globally on Australia to spend more in defence as a percentage of GDP, we will continue to see some great opportunities come in and out and around defence, and particularly those opportunities that, are the, if you like, the AUKUS Pillar 2 opportunities. They do require capital.
Bearing in mind that any of those opportunities, and I agree with you, David, that there is enormous opportunity in defence, but bearing in mind that any of those opportunities will not be getting contracts from the Australian Defence Force.
Because that's right. How's that going to work? Maybe David has a perspective on that. Have you got? Can you leverage more contracts?
My perspective is, I think there is a wonderful opportunity for Australia to really think about its procurement. But I think there's a wonderful opportunity to reconsider that, or think what would need to be true to make that work. What I do know, Joe, is that there are some great SMEs in Australia that are successfully contracting with the US Department of Defence, I think into the UK as well, I think there's great things that we can actually learn from that. But I'll say pleased. I think some of the great capability that exists in Australia, and can I make an observation on why I think some of these Australian defence firms SMEs can get these contracts from the US
Please,
and other places?
absolutely.
It's because they take very much they design for the user and the use case. And what I mean by that is they don't overspec these things. And I wonder sometimes if a big prime, if you want one of these, it's got to have all bells and whistles. It's got to do this and that. It's got to. Australian businesses say, well, actually, if I think about what this particular bit of defence equipment is being used for, and don't overspec it, but design specifically for that, then we can deliver it at a cheaper price. And I'm seeing a number of examples where that is exactly what the way that Australian defence companies are competing on the global stage.
So we now got an R&D review going on under Robin Denholm and whatever. My understanding is that the committee, the four-person committee, completely understands that it's a market pull problem. How do you solve that in a hurry in Australia?
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know if you saw what Robin and the team put out. I think it was last Friday, but it goes through, including this point, Sandy. I've got to say around government procurement is in there as well. So I was really pleased to see that. But I think also acknowledging that it's actually large companies is where the decline's been
No, exactly.
in
Yeah.
R&D spending, and it'll be interesting to see if tax incentives etc. Are used to try and compensate for that. But it's actually the SMEs that are doing a lot of the heavy lifting.
The SMEs
David,
are
as
doing the
a
heavy lifting.
former executive in one of Australia's great oligopolies, why do you think there's no R&D in any of our oligopolies?
So I actually have a real view on this, Joe, and it's a different
Okay.
view to one you've heard before. And my view is I think there is a lot of Australian businesses that understand risk better than they've ever done in the past, and they don't think the risk return equation makes sense for them, i.e., it's better to keep churning out the profits on the investment that you've already made rather than really scale up. Now, I think the issue with that is I'm not sure that we all think broadly enough about how you get to global markets with what you're actually
See,
producing.
Yeah.
And if you do, then you can afford to take more risk, i.e., invest more, if you see the prize of what can be returned here. So I think this is oversimplifying a billio, but I do think about it in terms of this broader risk return calculation. And I think somehow we've got to help businesses think about, the global stage. How do you, if it's population that matters, how do you get to 6 billion, not how you get to 26 million?
May I just go back to, we were talking about the key areas that you're going to focus, and you talked about medtech and you talked about defence, drilling down there. What else is sort of shaken out of the last year?
Look, there's no doubt that in and around resources value add, particularly in the rare earths and critical minerals,
Okay.
we've got, I think, an important role to play in and around that. It's playing to a natural advantage, this proximity advantage that I mentioned before. Having grown up on a farm, being from regional Victoria, I can't wait for us to do a bit more in and around agriculture, which is a broad agriculture, forestry and fisheries value added. We are seeing some opportunities in there at the moment. It's still in the pipeline, though. We've got to bring it through to fruition. Like Australia are great, innovative operators in agriculture, and I do see that there'll be some really good opportunities there, and ones that will impact regional Australia, not just the cities as well. And then I think also just you touched on the renewables and low emissions technologies. We will see. I mean, there's a lot of proposals we're looking at that space. We're careful not to step on the toes of the other CIVs. We're not another CEFC. We're not ARENA. But there is an important
Yeah.
role for us here as well, particularly in and around the manufacturing. And like you mentioned it before in terms of the statement of expectations, whether that's wind tower manufacture or other inputs to renewables, then we're keen to actually understand proposals from Australian business and how we can help and support them with
Perhaps
that.
wind tower manufacturing in the Latrobe Valley somewhere, perhaps?
Something like that.
But it is interesting that so far in the 10 investments to date, one of which was in the last 6 months when you've been at the helm, right? So 9 before that where you weren't. And I think, David, you pointed this out to me in a conversation before, which is that none have really been in the green energy space or the renewable space yet. And I imagine that that's going to change.
Yeah, it will. When you look at the pipeline, they're certainly in there. Some of them have longer lead times because of the kind of where they are in terms of the formulation. They might be big projects at pre-feed or well and truly before feed, so still in their earlier stages. And that's the interesting thing about our pipeline is you've got to have quite a big pipeline to actually get
Of course.
the deal settled. And
Yes.
with the momentum that I think we've got in the pipeline, we're looking at deals today that will probably settle in a year's time or 18 months' time as all the elements line up. But it's great that we're talking now. So that's good. It'll continue to evolve and build. But you'll see, I think, deals this year from all 7 of the priority areas that we've got within our investment mandate.
Right before the end of the year.
This financial year.
Oh,
Yeah,
financial
to
year.
June
Okay.
26th.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, because you've actually got there's a lot of billions you've got to expend by 2030, right? Before you get that
Well,
actual
I
final
want
5 billion.
it, yeah,
That's good
investing it
problem to
wisely
have.
on the. Well, rather than spend, I call it invest it wisely on with the taxpayer in mind.
Let's go shopping.
We are here to do a job and grow and build industrial capability in this country. So yeah, hugely conscious of that.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Look, Sandy, to you and Joe, thanks very much for the opportunity today. And I think it would be good to come back again and love to talk more about not just what we're going to do, but what we've done.
Yeah,
as well.
Yeah.
great,
So,
David. Thank you
Right.
so much. It's been a
Thank
terrific
you.
conversation, and we probably won't check in. We'll give you another 12 months.
Thank you
Great
so
to chat.
much.
See you. Bye.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.